There's spirals in sunflower seeds. There's spirals in the way that pine cone seeds are. Spirals in the nautilus shell. In fact, almost all seashells that you take out, you're going to see all these intimate spirals moving through them. Where does it come from? Okay, we're the measuring stick of the universe. It's got to be in our body. Always, no matter what you're looking for, you can look to yourself to find the answer. And here's that same shape around here. And remember I did this down there. Well, this form, which we derived straight out of the human body, all you got to do is connect this line to that line, and you get a form called the golden mean, or the golden mean rectangle, and which looks like this. This would have been the human body. This would be the diagonal, and this is the one that would come over here. Connect these together, and this is a golden mean rectangle. A golden mean rectangle is this, basically. You take the shorter edge of the rectangle, and you come down the same distance and form a square in it, based upon whatever this edge is. What's left over is another golden mean rectangle in proportion to this one, only it's faced this way rather than this way. You take the shorter edge and make another square, and you have another golden mean rectangle. Take the shorter edge and make another square, and you have another golden mean rectangle. And then another square, and another golden mean rectangle, and another square, and another golden mean square. And that will go on forever. And you can go out the other way. You can take the longer edge and make a square, and that's a bigger golden mean rectangle. And then you can take the longer edge and make another square, and that'll be another golden mean rectangle. So it'll go in forever, and it'll go out forever with no beginning and no end. And you have two primary lines of energy that move through this. If you take the diagonals across here, which is a square root of 2 triangle, across here, and the diagonal comes this way, and the diagonal, that is the male energy of a spiral. And if you take the arcing curve across here, and then here, and then here, and such, this is the female energy of a golden mean spiral. Both of them are there every time at once. You usually see in nature the female part of it that manifests, though it isn't always true. A good example of that is the bismuth crystal. The bismuth crystal looks just like this. That's how its shape is. It's the male part of the spiral. But almost always, it's the female part of the spiral that is formed. And if you take the diagonals of a golden mean rectangle, from this point to this one, to this diagonal, and there's another one that I didn't draw on here from here, they will locate the exact center. Well, this shape is real important in life too. It's a logarithmic curve. It has been said by other sacred geometry people that if you take from the navel and draw a line across the imaginary square around there, that this is a golden mean rectangle around there. And it's been said that you would then be able to draw a golden mean rectangle around, or logarithmic spiral that would come around, and it would focus exactly on the diagonal going from here to here. I believe that's almost true. And I'll have to explain in a moment what I mean. I personally do not believe that there are any logarithmic spirals in existence, naturally forming. And I'll have to explain myself here in a moment. But this is real close to the truth. And that if you were to take this line here, this one here that forms a square, and continue it up, then that's another one. That's another golden mean rectangle, or close to it. And then if you took this line over here, that's another one. And if you continue that around, you'd find that there are 8 of them. There are 8 of these logarithmic golden mean rectangles around the human body, associated with the 8 possible diagonals. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 possible diagonals, and there are 8 golden mean rectangles that spiral around the body, where these 8 spiraling forms of energy come and terminate in these 8 places around the body in this pattern, right around the original 8 cells that are located in the precise center of that pattern. Leonardo drew these lines on the body, and if you drew the lines down from where he put them on there, it forms this primary grid where it shows these 4 places in the middle and these 8 places around the outer edge, which happen to be the squares where the 8 primary spirals come in and focus in on. If you complete that grid totally, you would find that it's a grid of 64 squares, and which has a direct relationship to the I Ching and a lot of other things, and the DNA molecule and other stuff. But I'm going to stop that just for a moment and come back and address something, and that is this statement that I made that I don't believe that it was a logarithmic spiral. A logarithmic spiral is an irrational number, as we showed before. It has no end, and it is a spiral that has no beginning and no end. And it's something it's elusive. You can't get it all. Can't get a hold of the whole thing. And this whole thing of having no beginning and no end is very, very hard for us as humans to deal with. We have the part in us that can deal with something that has no end. That's pretty easy. But we have a real hard, at least I do, I have a really hard time with something that has no beginning. Just think about it. Think about something that has no beginning. You go, you can go on forever once it's started, but once it isn't, but it's hard because we are geometrical in nature, and which always has a center. And if we can't find a center, our mind just doesn't know how to deal with that. Well, that's because it's an irrational number. It's irrational. And so what life has done is really ingenious. I mean, it is the most brilliant thing that I've ever seen. That life has figured out a way to get around this problem. It's like God said to life, okay, do this thing that's impossible. And we said, it's impossible. And then we said, oh, but I know a way. I know how I can do this. And this is what happened. There was a man named Leonardo Fibonacci. He was a little bit almost contemporary with Leonardo da Vinci a couple hundred years before. And he was an interesting person. He was kind of a monk type that used to walk through forests and everything to relax in the forest, right brain stuff. But at the same time, his left brain was clicking on all the time. And he kept noticing the mathematics of the plant life and everything around there. And as I understand it, it was this plant that triggered it. It's called a Sneezeworth plant. You probably smelled it and sneezed and it's never been the same sense or something. But what it was is he noticed the leaf pattern on it. A Sneezeworth plant comes up and has one leaf, and then it grows one more, and then it grows 2, and then it grows 3, and then 5, and then 8, and it has 13 flowers. There's that 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. And he wrote that down, and he started noticing, and these were the things he wrote down. He found out that lilies and of course there's lots and more examples than these, but this is what he got. Lilies and irises had 3 petals, and buttercups and larkspurs and columbines had 5, and some delphiniums had 8, corn marigolds had 13, some asters had 21, and daisies almost always had either 34, 55, or 89 petals. And he looked at that and he said, hey, there's something there. So we had this sequence of 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55. Again, we showed you this one once before, where if you add 3 to 5, you get 8, and 5 to 8, you get 13, and 8 and 13, you get 21, etc., like that. And that sequence became known as the Fibonacci or Fibonacci sequence, depending on how you want to say it. Here's an example of the hibiscus flower, which has 5 petals facing out this way, and the stamen comes out in 5 petals facing down the other way. Pentagon facing one way, pentagon facing the other way. Of course, when we look at plants, we don't really think of them as being geometrical, but they are. And this is what life did to solve the problem. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 35, 89. 1, 2, 3, 5, 13, 21, 34. I'll go this far on it. Remember this number of the phi equals 1.618. 0. We'll go that far on it. And look what happens when you divide the one term into the previous term. If you divide 1 into 1, it equals 1. Now 1 is a lot smaller than this number. And if you divide 1 into 2, you get 2, which is a lot bigger than this number. If you divide 2 into 3, you get 1.5, which is smaller than this number. If you divide 3 into 5, you get 1.66, I believe. Yes, which is greater. If you divide 5 into 8, you get 1.60, which is under the number. 8 into 13 is 1.625, which is slightly smaller, greater. 13 into 21 is 1.615, just under. 21 into 34 is 1.619, just over. 34 into 55, 1.6176, just under. 55 into 89, 1.6181, just over. 89 to 144, 1.6179775. 44 into 233, 1.61805. It's called, in mathematics, it's called asymptotically reaching the limit. It will just keep getting closer and closer and closer and closer as the numbers increase. It'll never reach it, but it'll get so close, you can't tell it apart. You can't see it. And so when you look at things in life, like, for example, well, I'll show you an example in a moment. This will be a geometrical a view of what you're doing. Here's these 4 places that around the human body. Remember there's 4 spots we talked about in the basis? And there's 8 squares around it. We're going to pick one like that one right there. And we're going to take the diagonal across one of those little squares and use that as our measuring stick. And we're going to call it 1. And so the diagonal that goes across that little square there will be 1. And then turn 90 degrees and go to the next term. 1. Turn 90 degrees and the next term is 2. So you go 2 diagonals. And then 3. Then 5, then 8, then 13, then 21, then 34, then 55, then 89. And you can see this spiral coming out, which will look just like that. This is the inside of a nautilus shell, with this incredible precision moving out from there, this spiral that comes out like this. And each one of these chambers is more and more and more accurate in the creation of the spiral. But if you remember over here, in the beginning, as you go back toward the beginning, it gets less and less and less accurate, right? I mean, in the beginning, it's 1 and 2, which is way off, way under, and then closer. Look what happens when you go way back into the center. Can you see these first three ones? The first one came over here and hit the edge and bent. The next one came around and bent over because it wasn't even aimed right. And then three came out like that. And it wasn't until the fourth one that it started to fit properly, which is the closest, and it keeps getting. It actually was the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one where it started getting close, which is down here when it just starts to begin to approximate. And so if you looked at this, you would think that the nautilus shell made a mistake there in the beginning. You think, well, the guy didn't know what he's doing there. And mommy didn't know what he's doing when she made it. This is an egg shell. It's for a squid that lives inside here. And the mommy creates this shell, and the nautilus blows gas through these little tubes that causes the shell to rise and come up to the surface where it feeds. And it sucks the gas out, and it sinks to incredible depths below. And it's really pretty ingenious. And then when it gets big enough, it leaves, doesn't need the shell anymore, and it leaves and needs to come up and float up on the surface. So you can see the very mathematics going on. Well, there's no mistakes in here. This is exactly proper according to what we have figured out on how to make this spiral. So this spiral isn't a logarithmic spiral, though many books will tell you that it is. It isn't logarithmic. It's a Fibonacci spiral. It's different. And remember, in Egypt, they had those two spirals that came off, and one was Fibonacci and one was there. We're going to show that again. The difference between these two is very, very important in life. This is the pine cone, and you have spirals running this way around it, and you also have spirals running this way around it. You have two counter-rotating spirals, one going one way and one going the other. And if you counted all the spirals going one way, and then you counted all the spirals going the other way, I don't care if it's a daisy or a sunflower or this or any other, a pineapple, anything else, you'll find that it's always two sequential Fibonacci sequence numbers that determine how many spirals go one way and spirals go the other way. And this, geometrically, is the summation of what we were just talking about. Over here is the golden mean rectangle, and this is a Fibonacci rectangle. This edge is the same as this edge on both of them, and this is 1, and this is 1, or this edge is 1, and this edge is 1. So these two squares are exactly the same. The difference lies in the part that's left over. In a Fibonacci one, it's just two more squares. But in a golden mean one, it's a little bit greater. Instead of being 0.5, it's 0.618. And so there's a difference of 0.118, this little tiny difference. And so as this one starts over here and goes 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, this one starts in here at some undefined place and comes out. And very, very quickly, you could not tell the two apart. Because this little tiny piece, geometrically, gets smaller and smaller and smaller, proportionate to the squares that get bigger and bigger and bigger. In other words, this square here, that proportion of 0.118 is very big. You see how much of it is, relative to the line, that's a big piece. Here's the same amount relative to this square, and that's a lot smaller. Relative to this square, that little piece is even smaller. And so what happens is that little piece is fixed and it just goes to zero. You wouldn't think it, but from the Egyptian point of view, this is real important in understanding resurrection. The very chamber, the king's chamber, which many people said is a golden mean rectangle, is not. It is two perfectly equal squares. And the height of the king's chamber is 1/2 the diagonal. And this is all Fibonacci sequence stuff. This king's chamber, the sarcophagus sits over here, the inner end over here like this. And these proportions are not golden mean, they're Fibonacci. Because that was the key. It was the real key to, the very shape of the room was the key. what they were doing in there. You'll see when we get to that part of it. So this has no beginning and no end. This has a very, very definite beginning, but it doesn't necessarily have to have an end. And that's who we are. That's why we have a problem with something that has no beginning. So, is there any questions on this one statement? Yeah.
My question on that is that with the golden mean, doesn't that mean that it connects itself at one end? Somewhere or another along the line, if it doesn't have a beginning and an end, then it loops. Have you thought along those lines?
Well,
it's not in this dimension. I know that.
You can think along those lines, and that may be true. That would be a mathematical, theoretical approach to it. But purely from a geometrical image of the eye, if you have a vortex, that vortex can rotate in that direction forever, and it can go in forever. Absolutely forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Of course, all space is curved. And so you could probably come up with some kind of mathematics that might support that idea. But I'm not looking at it like that. But I could see what you're saying. But like the electromagnetic fields are the same way. They are all looping patterns, but they do not bend back on themselves. It's like red light and purple light don't meet. Red has a long wavelength, purple has a short wavelength, and instead of meeting, the purple goes into ultraviolet light and just transmutes into something different. And red light doesn't come from purple, but it comes from infrared. And so I don't know. But I hear what you're saying, but all I can say is I don't know. Yeah.
Does consciousness work in Fibonacci spiral or in the logarithmic? And
I believe that consciousness works in Fibonacci, and everything that's about us is Fibonacci, or totally Fibonacci.
So then, potentially the wider our consciousness got in terms of more of a universal mind, the closer we get towards that ideal then, right?
The more closer that we would approach that mathematically. It very rapidly approaches it so quickly that there's just no way to visually see the difference. It doesn't take very long for that thing to expand out there before you just, you can't hardly have an instrument that can detect any difference. Yeah. It's pretty ingenious what we did. It really is. It's an amazing solution to a problem.
I think I might have missed an important transition point because this whole discussion started upon the square within the circle.
And where are we going with all this?
We're going with the drawing by Leonardo. It's not placed in the same way, and I don't quite understand how the perfection of all of the mathematics in there can happen when the square is not placed in the same proportion that it was in the original drawing, where it was directly in the center. It's moved down.
You mean in the original drawing that we start out in the very beginning?
Exactly, right. It was centered, and then with Leonardo...
Leonardo, that's what I'm saying is that you missed an important little piece there. What is the next one in this? This goes back to it? Here it is. The difference in space, this is the center of the circle, right? This is the center of the square. That difference between the navel and the base of the spine is a sacred proportion. It happens to be the distance between the line of your arm, your hand, to the longest finger, which he also drew a line on the wrist showing that. That distance of your hand then there is identical to the same one between your navel and the base of the spine. And that is 1/2 the distance of here. In other words, if you could put that distance above your head, it would hit exactly 1/2, meaning that if you brought the circle down to here, that shape that we started out with would happen. In other words, the perimeter of this, of the square and the circumference of the circle are very, very, very close.
Well, I understand that the sacred proportion that you're talking about, so that was what prompted him to move it down and prove that the geometry still works out perfectly, because I would think that from the original drawing it would have to be placed perfectly in center, that the square would have to be centered within the circle at all times. The fact that he chose that sacred proportion to bring it down, I don't quite understand how it...
He wanted to show you that this is an important relationship, that when the square is around here, it's centered there, and that when the body will fit inside this circle, that will be centered on there, and that these two meet. That this is an important sacred relationship between the navel and the base of the spine. This is one way of showing that. He did a lot of really subtle things in here. For example, later on, and he did this in a lot of other works too, because he realized that this is true throughout nature. He's showing the energy field of a male. And he actually, as you're going to see a little later, he shows a star tetrahedral field on there. He did it by these simple little lines that you wouldn't, he hid it. But once you bring it out and you see it, it's the tetrahedral field for a man. But he knew that the female was a mirror image. It's an exact mirror image. The female and the male ones are mirror images. In other words, the male has its tetrahedral field like that, where the female has hers like that. It's a mirror image. And so in order to slyly tell you that, he wrote his writing so that the only way you can read it is with a mirror up to it. You have to hold a mirror up here to read this. And he knew that the mirror image extended throughout nature and everything. There was always these mirror images, the mirror images in the minds and all these things. This guy was really brilliant, and they were always secretly hiding everything, and he did it in very subtle ways that are extremely logical. Once you understand the way he's thinking, it took me a while to figure out how he thought, and after a while you'll see that this simple drawing has a hidden pattern behind it that is incredibly complex, that describes all these energy fields around the body. And the other thing that led me to think that there was really something here is that the mass consciousness around this particular drawing. In other words, we all have a real strong emotional feeling for this. It's being used constantly. It'll flash on a screen for one frame and we pick it up. We won't let go of it. We know that there's something real important here, all of us. We know there's something important, and we're not going to let it go. And yet, this has become one of his most important works, and it was a sketch. It wasn't meant even for public use. I mean, this is the Mona Lisa, which has become important, but this is really more popular than the Mona Lisa. It's reached deeper into our psyche than the very Mona Lisa. Why? Because there's a real powerful truth coming off that page. And we can't help but feel it. And when I unlay all of it, when I show you what he was into totally, I think you'll really know why that it's so powerful for us. We just don't have any choice. It's really important for us. Okay, remember we showed how this grid was here. Well, if you complete the grid, you complete all the lines. That he drew a line in the elbow that came down and just made that. Make the line go all the way down. Make them all complete themselves all the way through. And you end up with a grid of 64 squares around the body. The head is one of these squares. The head size is exactly 1/64 of the whole thing that they laid out here. And you realize that it's interesting because now you know that 6 squares in a row like this is a Fibonacci rectangle. And so this is a series. Now the human body's still here. Here's the head, the feet coming across, and the arms coming across, and the feet down here. This is the center of the body. And this is a Fibonacci rectangles coming around here. This is also the blue one stretching up to here is another Fibonacci one. So you have all these Fibonacci rectangles that are in there.